I'm back again with Lynn Rogers, continuing our conversation on loss and grief, this time with respect to another thing that can help us move on, and that is ritual. So let's keep going, Lynn.
Great. This is an area I love talking about. I can think of a couple. When my mother died, and we didn't have the best of relationships, but a dear friend asked me what I would do for a memorial service, since my father wouldn't have done anything in particular. And one of the things I did was plant a lemon tree in memory of her. It was a perfect thing. Long, hard thorns, which said, don't get too close. And at the same time, I love eating raw lemons. I love the smell of lemons. I love lemon trees. So it represented our relationship. And as with our relationship, the darn thing wouldn't grow, it wouldn't die. I didn't know what to do with it. But all along, there she was with me. I'm thinking about other rituals, like, for instance, a client of mine who was dying of cancer. When she was closer to death than not, she was in an antique store and found 4 wooden boxes she brought in to show me. They were big wooden boxes. She had 4 grandchildren, and she decided that in each box, she was going to put letters to each of those grandchildren. She was going to talk about what she loved about them, what she imagined for their future, what she was going to miss. She had mementos, she had pictures. And she said, when the boxes were done, she would be ready. And it reminded me that grieving, as well as rituals, sometimes happen before, sometimes happen after, sometimes a long time later. Do you have any rituals that have struck you as?
Well, let's not forget the traditions. As Jews, we have a certain ritual with burial. We sit Shiva. We mourn for a set period of time, a year for a parent, and there's a ritual to mark the end of that with the unveiling of the gravestone. Other traditions have wakes and lay out the body and drink and tell stories and sing and laugh. Other traditions have masses. So let's not forget the traditions. There's a reason that we have funerals and memorial services. I think probably one of the most common rituals we have these days are memorials, and they sometimes happen soon after death, and sometimes they happen a year later. And they allow people to come forward and share stories, and funny stories, and it's okay to laugh and to cry together. And so those kinds of what we have lately been calling celebrations of life, I think, are something that you and I have both done for people, and they're incredibly gratifying. We have a mutual friend whose mom died. It was a very difficult situation, and it wasn't until several weeks later, with her friends gathered all around her, when we began the celebration of Lil's life, that our friend was able to really cry and let go and weep with the friends around her. So it can be very cleansing, and it can be a gateway into moving forward.
And, as you said, thank you for, of course, that. And I was thinking of 2 things. One, that part about in the Jewish ritual of sitting Shiva, that after those 7 days, we're asked to walk around the block. So the structure of being reminded that it doesn't mean our grieving is over. It means that we're also part of the world of living, and we need to incorporate both. And in this time with COVID, where so many people can't have funerals at the time of a death, I've seen some really interesting things. And years ago, I did a memorial service here in Mexico, and the granddaughter, who was very, very close to her grandfather who had just died, was in school in the States taking finals. She couldn't be there, so we texted her in. We brought her in on the computer, and she was there to hear what everyone said. She was there to say what she wanted to say and was part of it. So I've seen some of that on Zoom for memorial services now. And I actually, a friend of mine, her grandson recently died, and they were a very religious family, and the service was in a church. There were very few people. It was family all spread out, but the service, there was an organ, there was a choir, there was singing, and all of that was put on Zoom. So I got to be part of it, and everyone else, and it really felt good.
And part of the value of that is the familiarity of those same rituals that we've lived with and grown up with through our whole lives and seen happen over and over as we've lost people through that journey. That the comfort of that, even for non-observant Jews, sitting Shiva is a ritual that many follow, even if it's just for 1 or 2 days, because the comfort inherent in that and the wisdom inherent in those traditions, in joining together for Mass, in hearing the choir, in sending up paper lanterns with lights in them, whatever those traditions are, bring great comfort. It's not the end of grieving, but it is a rite of passage.
And as we're saying that, you brought up earlier about chronic illness, and it makes me think about the rituals that I haven't seen so much, but the need to acknowledge those losses that we were talking about, that don't have to do with death, the loss of a job, the loss of a limb, and who I am and what my life is like in light of that change. And how do we say goodbye to that? And if we don't in some way acknowledge the loss, as we both know, sooner or later it's going to come to bite us. There's got to be some way of dealing with that.
I think that's a great idea, and you'd be someone great to create some of those passages.
Well,
and to offer them.
And as you know, it's about co-creating. It's about working with somebody to say what has meaning for you, because that's the other thing. Recently, a client of mine came in. Her mother had died, and she said to me, "I think there's something wrong with me." She said, "I have lots of friends, and they're coming and they're crying on my shoulder and feeling horrible that my mother died, but I'm not crying." She said, "Do you think there's something wrong? I mean, am I something wrong?" And I was laughing at, of course, because there's so many different ways people experience grief. And as you said earlier, at so many different times, you never know when it's going to come up. I just lost where I was going with that.
A client came in and wasn't crying.
And thank you. And so much for memory and old age. And for the year before her mother died, as her mother got sicker and sicker and things were getting bad, she was there. She was there night and day for her mother. She did everything she could think to do to make that last part of her mother's life as good as it could be. And as far as I was concerned, she had done a whole lot of her grieving and mourning in action with her mother at that time. So allowing for people to grieve differently is so very important, isn't it?
It's crucial, and it's especially crucial in preserving relationships, because I don't know the exact statistics anymore, but statistically, for example, when parents lose a child, those marriages more often than not do not survive.
Right.
Because, and I think it's essentially because people do grieve differently. And it's very hard in the midst of our own grief to accept the other's style, especially if it's significantly different than our own. If I'm crying and crying and my husband is withdrawn and staying to himself, it's very easy for me to say, you're not feeling it, you don't care, look, I'm crying and you're just stoic. But of course, he could be in as deep pain or deeper pain than I am. So I think, as with everything else in life, in relationships in life, communication is what it's about. And that's where you, as a counselor, as a therapist, as a chaplain, come in, why the work that you do is so valuable, because you can help negotiate that, not just for individuals, but for couples and for whole family systems, which is what your training is in.
And you know, as you say that, it's so much more in these kinds of issues about coaching. It's not about what happened when you were 4. It's about how are you dealing with what's going on now and what kind of support can you use now? Because as you know, sometimes it's right now, sometimes it's right now and then again in 3 months or a year. And it's really important that people figure for themselves what's most useful. You know, for some people, talking to best friends works. For some people, they're much more comfortable talking to a total stranger, which is, of course, one of the reasons why these death cafes that have sprung up have become so popular. People oftentimes find it easier to talk among strangers than to talk to family about things as important as loss and saying goodbye.
And maybe the death concept is something we'll pick up in another conversation.
Great. Thanks, Joe.
Great to talk to you, Lynn. Bye.
Bye.